Praise God, little rain. Be grateful. This soundtrack ought to have been playing behind the children of Israel. We thank God for you all who are tuned into the broadcast. You tuned into Guts, Gospel United Saved. Be grateful from the Black Nativity soundtrack. You're hearing none other than Jennifer Hudson, John Larimore, and Forrest Whitaker, as a matter of fact. And we're getting back into our series, and we're dealing with Exodus chapter 14, verses 21 to 25. And we're seeing God's great deliverance. The children of Israel weren't very grateful about the fact that they were in between a rock and a hard place. They were frightened, but God does have deliverance for you, and He has deliverance for them. And Moses stretched out his hand over the sea, and the Lord caused the sea to go back by a strong east wind all that night, and made the sea dry land, and the waters were divided. And the children of Israel went into the midst of the sea upon the dry ground, and the waters were a wall unto them on their right hand and on their left. And the Egyptians pursued and went in after them to the midst of the sea, even all Pharaoh's horses, his chariots, and his horsemen. And it came to pass that in the morning watch the Lord looked unto the host of the Egyptians through the pillar of fire of the cloud, and troubled the host of the Egyptians, and took off their chariot wheels, that they drave them heavily, so that the Egyptians said, Let us flee from the face of Israel, for the Lord fighteth for them against the Egyptians. Yeah, the Egyptians were not alone. They had a pillar of cloud by day and a fire by night. In other words, they had God on their side. We do too. Well, I guess it really depends on who you are. Do you know that you have God on your side? That's a personal thing. You have to determine that yourself. You have to know it is by your faith that you are justified. So what is it that you believe God for? Are you grateful? Now God instructed Moses to use what he had been using from the beginning of his journey of freedom to show forth God's mighty hand. Pick up your staff and raise your hand over the sea. Moses lifted up his staff, and God divided the sea, providing dry ground for passage. What a mighty display of power. God provided a wall of water that served as protection for the Israelites as they passed through. In their arrogance, the Egyptians thought that they too had safe passage and went into the divided sea after them. Pharaoh and his chariots met face to face with Yahweh. Through the pillar of fire and cloud, the Lord troubled or agitated the Egyptians. In his awesome power, God confused the enemy to the point where they could not even steer their chariots. The Egyptians were well aware of the fact that they had met a force that they could not fight. The Egyptians called out that the Lord was fighting for his people, so they sought to flee from the presence and power of God. What a great assurance to know that God will fight for you, his people. But we must stand still and see the salvation of the Lord. When we are in the will of God, no force is too strong, nothing too hard for the Lord. So not only did they drown in the Red Sea, but while they were trying to traverse the dry ground, their wheels got stuck, the chariot wheels got stuck. Things were happening to them, things that caused delay and hindrance. So what happened to the Red Sea when Moses drew back his hand? Well, the waters were divided and the sea was made to dry land. God provided as he said he would. God made a difference as He said He would. And we must trust and believe. As we talked about earlier in the beginning, or we allowed Ernest Pugh to tell us, I believe you most. And we followed that up with being grateful. Because if you believe God most, you can be grateful no matter what your situation is, no matter what's going on, no matter how it looks, even if you're between a rock and a hard place, or in this particular instance, between the Egyptians and a large body of water, the Red Sea. God is able to do just what He said He would do. We thank you for tuning into the broadcast. You are tuning in to Guts, Gospel United Saved, a variety talk show with a Christian point of view, hoping that you will have the guts to tell somebody about Jesus. I'm your host, Nikki V, and we thank you so much for tuning into the broadcast. We hope you continue to tune in Monday, Thursday, and Saturday. Monday and Thursday at 6 a.m. Eastern Standard Time. Saturdays at 10 a.m. Eastern Standard Time. The number to call, 877-217-5375. We're also on WEXY 1520, 3:30 in the afternoon, Monday through Friday. You can listen to replays of the broadcast. We thank God for you tuning into the broadcast. I'm Nikki V, hoping you will have the guts to tell somebody about Jesus. We'll be right back after this. I Surrender, Israel and New Breed. It's part of the movie, music from and inspired by I'm in Love with a Church Girl motion picture soundtrack. We do thank God for you all who are tuned into Guts, Gospel United States. A talk show with a Christian point of view, hoping that you will have the guts to tell somebody about Jesus. Returning back to our extended series for personal development, and that is developing leaders around you. And we're entering to the point where we're going to deal with the leader's crucial task of nurturing potential leaders. Now, many organizations today fail to tap into their potential. And why? Because the only reward they give their employees is a paycheck. The relationship between employer and employee never develops beyond that point. Successful organizations take a different approach. In exchange for the work a person gives, he receives not only his paycheck, but also nurturing from the people for whom he works. And nurturing has the ability to transform people's lives. Once you have identified potential leaders, you need to begin the work of building them into the leaders they can become. To do this, you need a strategy. We're going to use the acronym of BEST as a reminder of what people need when they get started with an organization and what they need for us to do to develop them. So we're going to use the acronym BEST. Okay, we're going to use the acronym BEST. B is believe in them. E is encourage them. S, share with them. And T, trust them. The BEST technique is the beginning of the next element of developing leaders around you, nurturing potential leaders. Believe, encourage, share, and trust. Nurturing benefits everyone. Who wouldn't be more secure and motivated when their leader believes in them, encourages them, shares with them, and trusts them? People are more productive when nurtured. Even more important, nurturing creates a strong emotional and professional foundation within workers who have leadership potential. Later, using training and development, a leader can be built on that foundation. The nurturing process involves more than just encouragement. It includes modeling. In fact, the leader's major responsibility in nurturing process is modeling. Leadership, a strong work ethic, responsibility, character, openness, consistency, communication, and a belief in people. Even when he is in the process of giving to the people around him, he is also modeling. The modeling process is at its best when a leader chooses a model of his own to emulate and then becomes a model to his team members. As 18th century writer Oliver Goldsmith once said, people seldom improve when they have no other model but themselves to copy. We leaders must provide ourselves as models for someone to copy. Mark Twain once joked, to do right is wonderful. To teach others to do right is even more wonderful and much easier. I have a corollary to Twain's idea. To lead others to do right is wonderful. To do right and then lead them is more wonderful and harder. Like Twain, I recognize that the self-discipline of doing right and then teaching others to do right are made difficult by human nature. Everyone can find excuses for not giving to those around them. Great leaders know the difficulties and nurture their people anyway. They know that there are people who will respond positively to what they give, and they focus on those positive results. Nurturing has the ability to transform people's lives. Now, there's some things that I found a leader must do to nurture the potential leaders around them. Now, ultimately, we're going to have to choose a leadership model for ourselves. Determining that will determine what kind of leaders we will produce in the long run. As leaders, you and I are first responsible for finding good models for ourselves. Give careful thought to which leaders you will follow because they will determine your course. There are 6 questions to ask yourself before picking a model to follow. 6 questions. Does my model's life deserve following? Do I have a leader worth following? This question relates to quality of character. If the answer is not a clear yes, I have to be very careful. I'll become like the people I follow, and I don't want models with flawed character. Does my model's life have a following? This question looks at credibility. Is it possible to be the very first person to discover a leader worth following? But it doesn't happen very often. If the person has no following, he or she may not be worth following. If the answer to either of the first two questions is no, really then you don't need to go on to the other four. You don't have to think about it. You need to look somewhere else. So what is the main strength that influences others to follow my model? That's the next question if they get a yes to the other two. What does the model have to offer me? What is their best? Also note that strong leaders have weaknesses as well as strengths. You don't want to inadvertently emulate the weakness. You want to emulate the strength. Does my model produce other leaders? The answer to this question will tell me whether the model's leadership priorities match mine in regard to developing new leaders. And finally, is my model's strength reproducible in my life? If I can't reproduce their strength in my life, then their modeling will not benefit me. If you admire Shaquille O'Neal's ability as a basketball center, but you're only 5'9" tall and weigh 170 pounds, you're not going to be able to reproduce his strengths. Find appropriate models, but strive for improvement. Don't be too quick to say that a strength is not reproducible. Most are. Don't limit your potential. If my model strength is reproducible in my life, what steps must I take to develop and demonstrate that strength? You must develop a plan of action. If you only answer the question and never implement a plan to develop those strengths in your life, you are only performing an intellectual exercise. You're only wrestling or brain wrestling. And you don't want to brain wrestle. You want to do something that's going to actually have some kind of result following. The models we choose may or may not be accessible to us in a personal way. Some may be national figures such as the president or maybe people from history. They can certainly benefit you, but not the way a personal mentor can. And that's really what you want to have effectively operating in your life to develop you. Someone who is there physically. Now you can look at other people for traits and you can look at other people for some examples. But really, if you want to know what is the best way or the best source to deal with, it is always going to be something that is, or someone who can be there physically before you, who can actually have some physical implementation, who can actually be someone you can look to physically as a result of what's going on. And we do thank you so much for tuning into the broadcast. You are tuned in to Guts, Gospel United to Save, a variety talk show with a Christian point of view, hoping you will have the guts to tell somebody about Jesus. We've got to take a break. Come back from the break. We're going to talk about God's omnipotence and return back into the beginning of freedom and get back into Exodus and talk about that a little bit. I do want to remind you, though, that the Fort Lauderdale Multicultural Church of God in Christ Sanctuary Choir is having their concert on Friday, November 15th at 7:30 p.m. So meet us at 744 Northwest 12th Avenue in the city of Fort Lauderdale, Florida, where the senior pastor is none other than Superintendent Roger A. Grimes. And we expect to see you there, expect to see you with us, sharing with us on various events and opportunities in which we can worship and praise and serve God. We thank you again for tuning into the broadcast. I'm Nikki V, hoping you will have the guts to tell somebody about Jesus. Mighty you are, the Walls Group, as we transition from this into the next part of the broadcast. Thank you for tuning into Guts, Gospel United to Save. I'm Nikki V, hoping you will have the guts to tell somebody about Jesus.
The heavens